It's Friday, and you know what that means. It's another edition of the Zogby Report, real and unscripted. That's where my son, Jeremy, business partner, Jeremy, and I every week take a look at what's going on in the world and try to figure it out with each other. How you doing?
Pretty good, you?
I'm okay, I think. Boy, there's a lot going on, you know, and I just came up with these. These are kind of two mega topics, okay? So the first one is, of course, the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade, actually bringing it back to the states, and a lot of controversy, a lot of debate, a lot of marching, a lot of anger, and so on. But here's my question, and then followed by my analysis. Has that decision changed in any way, do you think, the dynamic of 2022 and the elections in November? You know, almost every pundit has been suggesting, you know, forget about it. November is going to be a huge year for the Republicans. Got a very unpopular president, average of 38 approval rating, the lowest it's been. In addition to that, a guy who, Joe Biden, you know I like him, but seems not only to have lost control, but lost his voice as well. Does not have the eloquence that a Bill Clinton or Barack Obama has, where he can reassure. But obviously there's the ongoing problem of inflation that impacts everyone. It just seems as if we're in the Carter years. Redux. But on the other hand, have Democrats gotten a little bit of a goose? I've seen that before. They did not give Jimmy Carter a goose. He lost a huge landslide in 1980. On the other hand, I saw, and I've mentioned this before, 1998, where liberals, progressives are a little squidgy about voting for some Senate candidates, but after the Barnett Sleepian, the OBGYN in Niagara Falls, was murdered, and it was a pro-life activist who did that, you saw liberals come out as if it was going to be the end of the world if they lost the Senate. Are we going to see anything like that? Do you sense that there's more enthusiasm now among Democrats? There's a rallying cry. Has this changed the dynamic in any way?
Well, I mean, let me ask, are Democrats enthusiastic? Are they angry? Are they disheartened? How much of the left, because both sides have radicals, both sides have extremists, how much of the extreme and more radical are emboldened? Does that really boost the Democrats? We've got a long summer ahead of us, I think. We're just starting with the summer. Does it play into their hands? I suppose in the big picture of the party, there's probably a mobilization factor, a rally cry, a rally call to pound the pavement, to get our rights back, as they would say. But in the long term, I see two things. I see two challenges. Can a single vote issue drive a party for months going into November? Number one, of course it's an intense issue, but a lot of issues are intense. A lot of issues are intense, not just that one. But the other thing I already alluded to is what happens, and I don't know the answer to whether we are going to have another George Floyd type like summer. If I had to guess, I would think so, but if there is, does that play into the Democrats' hands? So those are my reactions.
We've got a long way to go. We know that. Republicans will say, and perhaps with a great deal of legitimacy, it's all about inflation. Where I disagree is they say this issue of Roe v. Wade is temporary. Ultimately, the great equalizer, the great force in this election will be inflation, the economy, who knows, possibly even a burgeoning recession. But with that said, this issue directly impacts tens of millions of women, particularly women of pregnancy age. And it is in several elections that it was young women, suburban women, even college-educated women who turned the tide. You can argue that they turned the tide in 2008 for Obama, absolutely, definitely turned the tide for Obama in 2012, and in 2016 did not turn the tide for Hillary Clinton. They did not show up in as large numbers for her. But this time around, I don't think that the abortion issue goes away. Will it stay at the level of intensity that it is at this moment? I actually think so. And I think there's another thing out there to pay attention to, and that is that the GOP had been, or has been, making inroads among suburban moms on the issue of social and emotional learning, on parental, not control, but parental say in what's taught in schools, critical race theory. But I wonder if the notion of abortion rights, or how far the Supreme Court goes in the direction of contraception, the morning after pill, and so on, are seen as a greater threat. I think that's something to watch very closely. And so as we poll, we're going to be watching women, young women, suburban women pretty closely.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to underplay, undermine, or deny the fact that for millions, tens of millions, scores of millions of people, abortion is a major issue. But I think if you were to break it down, who are the groups that are, in terms of the largest numbers, that, you know, are most impacted by it or are most charged up by it? Liberals, progressives, and then women who are liberal and women who are progressives. But then you get into inflation, and now inflation is one of those things that affects everybody. It affects a newborn baby. Mm-hmm. It affects somebody who has dependent on Social Security. It affects people who are living paycheck to paycheck. People who are living paycheck to paycheck, I mean, and we've seen this consistently going back 5-10 years. It was 70%, 75%, now it's up to 80% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And so, you know, something that becomes a philosophical and a rights issue based battle versus something that literally is about survival and has also toppled over the course of millennia, has toppled bloodlines, dynasties, monarchies, empires. Inflation has that ability to tear apart the social fabric. Let's not underplay this as well, you know, people are focused too much on money. No. Inflation, everywhere that it has happened, going back to even before the ancient Greeks, when they were debasing money, it has it has a multitude effect, not just on your standard of living, but on tearing apart the social fabric.
I don't disagree at all with that. I mean, I think that's strong. Here's what I wonder, and only wonder, and that is, people vote for candidates when they think they can do something, make a difference. So let's look at the two issues. You've got the president, obviously, who will be judged poorly by Election Day on the economy, more than likely. But the question is for the Republicans, what are you going to do better? Not differently, but what are you going to do better? Versus when it comes to an issue like abortion, which is highly charged and can motivate millions, literally millions of voters that make them much more enthusiastic, you have a real contrast in what the candidates this year for Congress, 2024 for the presidency, of what you can do. And arguably, what Democrats can say is, we can appoint judges, we can pass legislation, we can protect women. So maybe there's a difference, the what can you do and not do gap.
Well, if they use that message, the problem is up until now, the messages that they've been drumming up, which I think are just repulsive and ridiculous, are that we're going to go back to the days of, Jack Johnson. When Jack Johnson was a boxer, he became a fugitive because he married a white woman. So misogyny laws are going to pop up again. It's going to be like, the birth of a nation all over again. You're going to have white supremacists in the White House. You're going to have all these different kinds of laws from the turn of the century. And the fact of the matter is, I just saw a poll last week that 94% of Americans agree with interracial marriages, not dating, marriages. And that's not a surprise because look at the percentage of diversity among Gen Z, our youngest generation. They're half non-white. I'm a millennial. We went to, those of us who went to public school in cities, in small cities, we were brought up with diversity. Of course, we saw it also on TV, not just in the lunchroom, not on the basketball court, in the playground, but on television, The Cosby Show, A Different World, those classic shows from that era. And so, this old America that clings to, white supremacy is, by and large, especially if a poll is showing 94% of Americans agree with interracial marriage, I think that's going to have to be a message that the Democrats stop doing and do exactly what you say. But will they do that, and when will they pick that up?
I don't want to go down this road. We can save that for another broadcast. The discussion of race and racial justice has definitely shifted since the Trump years, and let's leave it at that. Not last word, but just leave it at that.
Well, the coverage of it has, I would say.
So, in the final analysis, are you ready to say that Democrats could possibly have a shot at keeping a majority? Is it more competitive today than it was 2 weeks ago?
There was another thing I wanted to say was, you're right. What are the Republicans going to do? But they're going to keep doing what they've already been doing, and so far they've proven that they do have right now a superior ground game in the suburbs and among independents. And so if they just keep that up, it's going to be very difficult for Democrats. I'm not going to suggest that hubris can't get the best of Republicans. It most certainly can. But you had a second thing you said. This was the first thing.
This is the first topic, yeah. I just have one more thing to say. There was our colleagues at Marist just published a poll within the last 48 hours for NPR and PBS. And in it showed a huge enthusiasm gap on the issue of abortion. The Democrats were far more likely to be motivated to go out to vote for Democrats because of the issue than Republicans were to vote for Republicans on this issue. There were other findings that were consistent, but that just lends a little credence to my argument that, yes, I do believe the game has shifted. In fact, that same Marist poll, for the first time in a while, showed the Democrats in the congressional generic, leading 46-41. Now, not a perfect measurement by any standards, and Rasmussen, on the other hand, still has a Republican lead, but maybe we're watching something develop here. Now, I do have another topic.
Yeah.
This is right up your alley. So, the president was at the G7 this week, and in Madrid, what happened was there was a ceremony in which NATO welcomed Sweden and Finland, both kind of within the shadow of the big bear.
Yeah.
And neither very interested in joining NATO before Ukraine. They have now joined NATO and been welcomed. President, of course, made a big deal, as did NATO, that this is European security at its finest. Vladimir Putin, made the case that this is European insecurity at its worst, and to watch your back. Did this action, welcoming these two new countries, make World War III more inevitable? Or a possibility? More of a possibility?
Of course.
You do think so? Tell me.
Who's trying to avoid World War III? I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. You go back to when the wall came down, and G.H.W. Bush said, not one finger's length, meaning not to go into one country, and every president ever since. I don't know if Trump made overtures, although I don't think he did very well with Ukraine. He certainly was arming, or under his administration, there was arming and aiding of Ukraine. But you have to look at Washington, D.C., and you have to realize that they're not satisfied. They're not satisfied until they get every single country in Europe under NATO control. They want Moldova. They want Belarus. They're not going to get Belarus. They could get Moldova. Heck, they would even like some of those breakaway regions like Transnistria. They want Ukraine. They wanted Romania, Bulgaria. They want Albania. They want the Czech Republic, Slovakia. They've got most of these countries. They're not going to stop. And so you have to say, well, is it their right to have all of those countries that are geographically closer to Russia, some of which have a long cultural history with Russia? Is it their right? And I would even say, to go even further, within certain elements of the Pentagon and the intelligence agency, they would love nothing more than to see Russia break up, splinter into a dozen tiny nations. What we have here are relics of the Cold War, hawks who want to see Russia completely disintegrate because they absolutely reject the notion of a multipolar world. They want to maintain U.S. hegemony, and U.S. hegemony has been around for 75 years, but you can't maintain hegemony forever. You've had it for 3 generations, and it's falling apart, and you can see it because all these countries are building trade deals around the U.S. They're going to bypass the dollar. They're going to drop the dollar. The dollar is going to mean nothing to India, to China, to Russia, to Iran, and to all those countries that want to trade with them. And so they've dug their heel in the grounds. China and Russia have said, we believe in the new Asian century of the 21st century. And so everybody's got their heels dug in, and nobody's going to back off. And what do you expect?
So I've studied the Cold War a lot when it was still very cold and at times very hot. And both sides, principally the United States and Russia, each with our own history, each with our own perceived defense needs, each with our own pathology, each with negative histories, part of our histories that we should wish never really happened. Neither side able to really understand the other. Now, I will say, so there's no misunderstanding, look, Russia's history of authoritarianism and tyranny is abysmal, horrible. We're not talking about good people, Lenin and Stalin and Putin. By the same token, with the United States, let's be sure that we understand when we talk about democracy and universal values that it's always followed by but the Native Americans, except for African American slavery. There are no buts or howevers. That's ingrained as part of who we are. With that said, though, I do fear that while the expansion of NATO is principally done out of sincerity and a fear of Russia, a new and expanded Russian empire, an expansionist force, an expansion of tyranny, and at least a temporary partnership with China. That NATO has its legitimacy. By the same token, Russian fear of invasion, Russian fear of being encircled, Russian fear of being humiliated at the hands of the West is also equally legitimate, and that's what kind of makes me not very hopeful about this situation.
Well, it's interesting, when we compare Russian and American history and we talk about the brutality of it, instead of looking at domestic history, I would look at the history of empire. And of course, Russia had at one point been as far as California. And so how many different peoples did they have to displace or conquer in order to get, that's probably the biggest empire the world has ever seen when it went from St. Petersburg all the way into North America. But the fact of the matter is, and I know during the Cold War that Russia, of course, was aiding and abetting certain countries and infiltrating certain countries and ensuring that they remained communist, and if they weren't communist, probably trying to make them communist. But I don't think that there is an institution in the world that has toppled more governments, supported more dictators, has done more clandestine operations, and has resulted in more deaths than a specific intelligence agency whose name shall remain unnamed, but you know exactly who I'm talking about. No nation has that could even touch the United States history of foreign policy. And so that goes back to really the birth of the OSS, and of course what followed the OSS. That is a legacy unto itself. The problem is that I fear that there are many people around this world that want a World War III, and they're going to get it. And I hate to say that, but if they want it, they're going to get it.
So do we call this show our celebration of July 4th, Independence?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Independence is a great thing.
So I have a little exercise for our viewers and listeners, and that is to get out a ruler and measure Moscow to Vladivostok and measure Moscow to Chicago. And you're going to find that they're roughly the same. And Vladivostok, as you know, is not all the way east. Russia goes in, Siberia goes even further out. And Moscow, of course, is not entirely way over to the western border either. But staggeringly, that's how big Russia is. Good discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. Happy 4th, everybody. 4th. We'll see you next week.
Hey.